Fantastic. So thanks so much for joining and giving up the time. So Andre and I chatted a little bit last year about this. So within delivery, we have a sort of slightly bigger goal that we're working on now, which is to bring the release and deployment processes inside GitLab. So at the moment, probably the majority of our tooling is like custom code that we've built to handle those things. But sort of long term, we actually want to make this like full GitLab product featured so that other people can benefit from it and also contribute. So as sort of a step towards that, at the moment, we're working towards generating changelogs from commit messages. So currently we generate the changelogs as custom code that we run when we do our releases. I've linked the epics in the agenda, like Yurek's written out like a super long detailed epic, which explains kind of like how we're going about doing this. But the sort of key thing is it's a step towards bringing something that's quite custom coded into the GitLab product. Now, the slight thing, which is why we're meeting today, is we're going to be generating these from commit messages, which we've been working with Andrew and also with Jackie and Orit about, like, is this what, like, will this be beneficial to other customers as well? And it seems it will be. But we know that, well, we expect there'll be some friction, mostly, I guess, internally when we roll this out, that at the moment, it's not super easy to edit your commit messages. And certainly as people adopt this kind of new process, we're expecting that a lot of people will likely commit something, realize, oh, actually, this does need to go into the changelog, and then need to update their commit messages. So we have this separate epic, which we'd really like to find a way to make it super easy in the UI that people could just update the commit message afterwards. And within delivery, we're well equipped on backend. So got Yurek, Myra, plus others. But what we really don't have is any design or front end skills. So that was really where, so I know, Andrew, you've already sort of reached out to Nick about product design. And yeah, that was really where I asked Andre for some help on, could we get some front end support to actually help us get this feature completed? So that's the rough background. Now, I suppose there's also, I suppose the other additional thing is there's more than one team here, right? So we are focusing right now on commit messages. There has been quite a long running discussion about should it be commit messages or MRs. We've picked commit messages as our first iteration. And from chatting with Orit and Jackie, that sounds like it's a good choice. But certainly in the future, it would be great if there was flexibility and you could configure this and choose what you wanted. So we don't have any of that in our timeline right now, but it's certainly something which in the future we'd hope like would be a possibility as well. So, are there any questions?
Thanks for
that. Yes, could you share a bit more about how you imagine this workflow happening? Like, where is the person that is going to be interested in amending that commit message? Is it going to be, so how I picture it is, you know, I'm on my branch and I have a list of commits, and I know that this will make it to the change log, and I probably want to make the change there. You picture it the same way, or am I not thinking in the right way?
I mean, well, I suppose you might have spent more time thinking. I guess from my side, I'm kind of very much open. Like, I think our requirement is it will be easier if there was a way, and I think that's really where Pedro, perhaps we're looking to you and your sort of expertise on that one. But I don't know, maybe you have a better answer already.
Yeah, so the core idea is that as part of your merge request, you submit your changes, the changelog becomes a commit message or part of the commit message. And as part of that, people will also be tasked to review those commits, the messages, just to make sure, like, hey, is the writing correct, etc. It's basically the same as we do now with the changelog files, except we move from files to commit messages. Now, as part of that, a reviewer might say, "Hey, can you please, rewrite this part?" Or, "Hey, you forgot to add this necessary tag." Um, for people experienced enough with Git, dealing with that is fairly straightforward. You do a rebase locally, change your commit message, off you go. But I think for a lot of less experienced people, or people simply in a hurry, or whatever reason they don't have that ability, they should be able to do that through the UI. And that would be as a start the merge request UI. So they go to their commits tab, they click some edit button, type the new message, click save, done. And then GitLab internally will handle the rebasing and everything necessary for that. Later on, we want to probably extend that to being able to do that on arbitrary commits in the branch. With that said, I think the most important part is doing that, from a merge request. It's more that if we already do that, I think it's very little extra work to also support that on just some branch. Thinking about it, I'm not sure to what extent people use that approach. I think through a merge request is probably the most likely way of doing it. Because if they want to add it on a branch, you can say, well, then just create a merge request and do it there, or do it locally. Because chances are, if you're working on the branch, you're going to be using a merge request anyway. But so that's essentially the workflow. Feedback, you go to your commits, edit the commit, save, wait for it to reload it, done.
So today, do we use changelogs today to generate anything on the delivery team?
Well, so the current workflow for developers is they submit the merge request, and if the changes warrant an entry in the changelog, there's a certain file they have to commit as well.
Right.
It's like a YAML file in a directory called changelogs. And the process there, generally what people do is they either commit that separately. So they commit their changes, a reviewer says, "Hey, you forgot to add it," then they commit that separately. Or they perhaps amend those changes to an existing commit. There's a tricky step there where for contributors, we ask that they mention the merge request ID in that file. And this sort of inherently requires a two-step process where you commit your changes, push them, set up a merge request, then go back and amend whatever commit changed that file so that it now includes the merge request ID. So sort of the pain that we're trying to solve with this, it already exists today, which is going to basically put a bit more emphasis on needing the sort of a built-in way of handling that. And then finally, what delivery does, or specifically our tooling, as part of the release process, it will take all these files for a given release, and it will basically sort of merge them together and put them in a changelog markdown file. And that we then commit to master and whatever other branches might be necessary. That process will stay the same. We're basically changing the input, not the actual generation process. Although, as part of building this into GitLab, internally it will do things a little differently, but the end idea is the same.
I guess I've got sort of the next question, and I don't know what the setup of the GitLab project is, but are generally merge requests squashed for the GitLab project?
It really varies. From what I remember, we don't have any sort of hard rules on the matter. I think looking at what we have in mastery, I think it really varies per reviewer. Some say, hey, we have a whole bunch of sort of work in progress commits, please squash those together. Others might use squash on merge, some might not use it at all. That is not really, I don't think it would really change with this, because I think it's sort of a separate problem where we have to say, hey, instead of introducing all these work in progress commits that on themselves don't work, please merge it together. But I think that's separate from the ability to just edit a commit message, for example.
Yeah, I guess the reason I asked, and I guess this is like sort of the follow-up question that I have is, if GitLab went and changed the settings and always forced a squash and merge, at the time of merge, you can write your squash commit, and you could write your really good commit message there in a markdown editor, or more or less a markdown editor, and then you could use that for your changelog generation. You could use all the squash commits as the pieces that you wanted to pull in, and then you don't have to go and mess with the commits that are inner branch. I think there's like a bunch of scary technical things as soon as you start to like amend commits that are already pushed into source control where other people can pull those down. Like you're force pushing on top of things where other people might have branches at that point, right? So like you've got a bunch of scary things that can happen, whereas the squash commit doesn't have those. Alternatively, you also get to write a merge commit. I was just saying, alternatively, you also get to write a merge commit when you merge, no matter what, because we don't do fast forward merges. And you could just write a good merge commit and use merge commits as your piece. And like those are two things that sort of exist today that don't open up this like other can of worms of like enabling editing of commits that already exist today. And so I'm curious if like we've looked at those things.
Yes, we have. There's a couple of problems with relying on those settings. The moment you start squashing, whatever carefully written commit messages people have and the history, that gets thrown away. So for example, if I submit a merge request with 3 commits that are related, but they operate independently, as in I can revert them individually and everything will still work. And they have carefully written commit messages explaining everything. If somebody goes in and does a squash or merge, all that info is lost. Which means later on it might actually be quite difficult to figure out, hey, why did we make this change? Similarly, with the merge commits, the issue is that the titles of commits are used as changelog entry messages. So if every line in the changelog, that's the commit title. And for merge commits, that title is something like merge branch and then a giant branch name. In other words, it's completely useless for changelogs. Now, users can change that, but now the responsibility of writing the changelog data is put by the person that is merging the merge request. And although they've probably reviewed the changes, they might not have enough knowledge to write a proper changelog subject, maybe additional details in the commit body. So the result is that although that approach looks appealing, like from a technical point, like we wouldn't have to change anything, it means that now those merging merge requests, which is probably some random reviewer that already has to review 50 merge requests in a week, they now have to decide, okay, wait, we have to write a nice message, and this and that. They're gonna forget. Like I can guarantee people are gonna forget, and the changelog is gonna look like a list of 200 lines saying merge branch X or something. And so, and the third problem there is not all projects use this. So a lot of projects, they will use the fast forward rebasing. They don't want merge commits. And although they can still edit commit messages through their local Git setup, they would still be stuck, if they have contributors that don't have that knowledge. Just because we decide, we're not going to, build this in UI because you can do squash or merge or whatever the alternative might be. And so they would be an option if we basically needed it right now. We didn't have anything else. Then we could say we can use that as sort of a temporary solution. But I think unfortunately it just isn't a viable solution.
So just to clarify, Yorick, what you were saying about like people potentially forgetting to change the merge commits. Like if the merge commits was a viable path and people forgot to edit the merge commits, wouldn't that be the case as well for editing the commits inside the merge requests UI?
No, because it's a different workflow. So let's say you submit a merge request with 3 commits, and your last one is the one that's supposed to go in a changelog. But it has a bunch of typos in it. So somebody reviews that, ideally using the functionality we're building that you can leave comments on commit messages. They'll say, hey, there's a couple of typos here, please fix that. They create it as a discussion. It blocks merging, the same workflow as normal, basically. And the author can then go in, edit it, mark the discussion as resolved, and off they go. The trouble with the use of merge commits is that, first of all, by default, there's just a merge button. So I think most people wouldn't even think, oh, hey, wait a minute, I have to actually click this other button so it shows the text field to edit it. And then, second step, they have to remember, wait, I actually have to edit it. I have to change it to something that, when presented in the changelog, is readable by users. So it basically adds these 2 easy to miss steps for reviewers.
And it's not reviewable. So it's
Right.
something that the person doing the merge is the one doing it, but they can put that up for review.
Right. And the thing there is, once it's merged, once it's in master, you can't change it. That is a downside of this approach versus having it in a file that you can commit to later. With that said, I don't think we've ever had a need for that, but it does put a bit more pressure on making sure that this is reviewed properly and that when we merge it, it is acceptable. And with the merge commit approach, that's just, you would have to depend on the reviewer basically writing their merge commit message, copying it, starting a new discussion, and then asking other reviewers like, hey, is this suitable? They say yes, and then they copy it back some point later, and then they merge. But it's just too easy to make mistakes there.
I mean, it might not solve everything that you're saying, but we could potentially open up the merge commit text field to anyone to edit, or I mean the author and developers, and up in the same way that they're able to edit the description, and we can have that being saved to the backend, for example. And I think there's an issue open for that because people, there are teams that actually do that. They write the merge commit message beforehand at the start of the merge request, and they want to save that for the end.
Right, and so you could do that, but then it's basically duplicate work in the sense that you're already writing your commit message, and now suddenly you also have to write the commit merge message. It's just too easy to miss because there's also nothing in a UI saying like, hey, you have to do this because we use commit messages for our changelogs. So you end up, if you go down that path, you probably have to extend our CI tooling to just by default always produce some error saying, hey, if these changes have to go in a changelog, click this button to edit the merge commit message. And then probably it has to tell people, and then copy paste it in a discussion and ask people to review it. It's just going to be very unintuitive, I think. Yeah, and prone to error. And also, if you have it in a discussion, I think reviewing it text in a discussion is a bit more difficult because you can't just click a line and leave a comment on a specific line. You have to copy paste it, quote it. Whereas I think with the work that we're doing on reviewing commit messages, we can reuse that. Kind of similar to how you review a diff. You just click the line, say, here's a typo. And then you get, we can sort of piggyback on the benefits that we introduce by allowing people to review commit messages.
I want to clarify, you've mentioned this a couple of times, that there's work in progress to comment on commit messages. As far as I know, there is no work on progress. There's an issue for it, but there's nothing prioritized from any of our groups to actually do comments on commit messages.
Let me check, because I recall that it
virus,
was
right. Like, so we have mostly our work is in progress to generate the changelog from commit messages, and then this is a separate piece of work to allow editing of commit messages in the UI.
No. So
in the merge
there's
request
three
interface.
things. So we have the changelog generation stuff completely separate. We have the editing of commit messages, separate epic basically. And then I believe for last release, I think we originally planned the ability to comment on commit messages, but that got pushed back. I'm not sure if that got pushed back even further from when I last looked at it like 2 weeks ago, because I think at that point the comment was something like, oh, hey, we're going to do this for, I think, either this month or next month, but it might have been changed again. Let me look it up, see if I can find it.
It is straight in the backlog and has a weight of 13. Like it's a probably not due at all.
Paste it in the chat.
further.
Yeah. So we've talked about it a couple times, but just the size itself and the I guess that there was not a ton of appetite for this. It was kind of small. We didn't really chop it up into pieces, into workable pieces. But there are a couple of things there. So one was treated as a suggestion where you could change it. That was a lot of work. And if you just want to throw a comment on it, then how that would be smaller. And then we question, well, is that really valuable and stuff like that. So yeah, so it is there, but it needs a bit more discussion for sure.
Right. Either way, like the lack of that is not critical. Like especially considering this functionality that we're building now, it's not going to be ready, tomorrow. It's probably going to take, I would say, 2-3 months to fully flesh out, to be rolled out, across different projects. And perhaps in parallel, delivery can perhaps help out with this issue. The point is more like, if we rely on squashing or merge commits, it's just too easy to make mistakes, and the reviewing workflow, I don't think, will ever be as good as it can be when you're reviewing either commit messages, diffs, or something else. So I don't think we should basically rely on squashing or merge commits.
Yeah, and I will say that when discussing, especially for users that migrate from other tools like Garrett, they do miss the ability to, let's say a lot of projects have standards for commit messages that have to follow a certain nomenclature, like include a Jira ticket or an issue ID. And having that ability kind of enables that workflow in a very nice way. So it has come up before. I can't see value.
Cool. So to wrap up, what should we do for the next steps? Thanks.
I was gonna introduce that
Okay.
bottom line. So playing into my comment, we already looked into exactly the cost of each avenue and everything, and what we're trying to understand here is exactly the problem behind it and everything. What would be the best solution? How to build it into merge requests? How to build it into commit pages? And we understood that doing this for any commit on any branch that is unprotected is fairly easier to do than on the merge request, just because we have a lot of user experience concerns and trying to keep the page usable and easy to use. Just the front-end architecture that currently have on the merge request is significantly more complex than the commit pages. Having said that, Daniel, you brought up a good point that it does open up a couple of use cases for that cases, and it would still be reasonable from what you described, Yorick, to have someone on a merge request, oh, you need to edit, or your CI job, you need to edit this commit, and you link to the commit page /edit or something. It doesn't have to be directly to a merge request itself. So we can build one solution that would, yes, it's not ideal because it's not building onto the UI of the merge request, but it's still a feature that is available for users to use, right?
Yeah, and that's totally fine. Like if there's just, you click a link to the commit or something and the edit functionality is there, totally fine, right? Okay.
So I think, Amy, so for now, I think what we can do is, from our perspective, is take a look at the effort and try to score it in terms of weight for that particular initial issue, and try to prioritize into our milestones. Daniel, that's totally up to your expertise in terms of prioritization. Sean is not on the call, so the backend manager for source code. So I think you're still going to have a thread with him to understand whether we can use your team's help, Amy, to build this feature into the commit view, or we can leverage the source code engineers, or both. I'm collaboration, pair programming. I don't know.
Okay, I'll follow up.
So sync up with Sean and see what he thinks about that in that particular sense. But I do think there's still a couple of questions from UX, and so I do encourage everyone to sync up, or maybe we can start a Slack channel or actually let's do it on the issue on the Epic, I guess, for transparency. So if you have any more questions, if need, we can set up another call, but I guess we can take this asynchronous from now on.
Okay, so Andre, should I let you own the front end side? I'll catch up with Sean on back end effort, and do we need to do any extra coordination on design? Or I suppose we could do like pingers if you need more, I suppose.
Yeah, so Mike Nichols, the designer for source code, already shot a proposal on the issue that I linked there. For now, I think it would be good to have your feedback if there's anything they're missing. I think they're still going to have a bit of a discussion just to warn users that this is a destructive action or changing the history. Currently, there's no warning whatsoever, so it might be too simple to change a commit, I guess. But that's just our refinement of UX. And Mike can totally own. Oh, Mike, you're on the call. I didn't see you there.
Yep, sorry, I was late. Yeah, so I mean, I think the mechanics are pretty simple because we have lots of patterns from comments and things like that, as far as, the UI elements that are involved. But yeah, some of those flows and some of those warnings and messages still need to be thought through. So yeah, sure. There's a first volley out there, but it's definitely not complete by any stretch of the imagination. So feel free to work with me on that. I'm sure Pedro will probably have some input as well.
Great.
Yeah, and just to add as a final part for me is the backend side. I had originally planned or basically assumed that we would be doing that. And that's mostly because this is going to require some changes in Gitlab. We will probably have to do those anyway. And I think at that point, it also makes sense that we do whatever backend logic is necessary in the Rails application, simply because we know, how to use the Gitlab functionality because we wrote it. But this depends a bit, of course, on our time schedule online, for example. So
schedule something in with Sean, you reckon, so we can chat through that, because I think that's totally valid. Maybe we'll pair up or something like that. So yeah, let's schedule that one in. Cool. We're over time. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in. Let's all sort of take ad hoc and see if we can move this forwards. But I appreciate the time today.
Cool.
Thanks,
Amy. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.